The issue is you've spent some time working on your project and you've decided to use some masking techniques. So you apply the mask, whether it's masking tape, Frisket, transfer tape, or vinyl, doesn't matter. You apply the mask, you spray some more paint, you go to remove the mask only to find that you are removing underlying paint layers with the mask. The mask has pulled up your paint. Why? To begin, I have a panel, and if you follow the channel, you probably recognize this as the panel I painted in the Ghost Flame tutorial. So what I've done at this point is I've taken some Createx Illustration White and I sprayed a line along the right side edge of this panel. So once I had the white stripe painted, then I used air from the airbrush alone to flash dry the paint. It's not actually cured, but it is dry to the touch once you start putting air flow over the paint. At that point, I immediately stuck a piece of masking tape onto the panel. You can see the first one is labeled air dry. From there I waited 10 minutes and then I added another piece of tape labeled 10 minutes. Again, I waited another 10 minutes, stuck another piece of tape on, labeled it 20 minutes, and so on and so forth until I got to 70 minutes, which is the point where I ran out of how many pieces of tape that I could put on the panel. Now at this point, this has been sitting here for about an hour. Once I put the last piece of tape on, I allowed, it's been a little bit over an hour, maybe an hour and 10 minutes, so another 70 minutes for this to sit. I haven't done anything with it since then. So let's start removing this tape and see if any of this paint is going to lift. So we'll begin with the first piece of tape that I applied, which was the air dry. And you can see that it did pull up some of the paint. It left stripes on the actual panel. So let's go to 10 minutes. Not as bad, but again, it did pull up some of the paint. So on to 20 minutes. Still less, but it still pulled up some of this paint. 30 minutes. It's getting better, but you can still see the stripes left from the masking tape on the actual white stripe on the panel. 40 minutes. Probably a little bit less, but it still removed some of the paint. And 50 minutes. Again, it's less, but you can still see a little bit of striping left in the paint from the masking tape. On to 60 minutes. About the same as 50. And last but not least, the 70-minute mark. Again, about the same. I have to say, I'm actually pretty impressed. I'm surprised that the tape didn't remove more of the paint than it actually did. I anticipated that it would. If you look close, and I'm not sure if the camera is going to pick this up or not, but if you look close, you can actually see stripes all up and down this panel where the gaps were in between the strips of tape where no paint was removed. So let's try one other test. Now that was just my fingernail, so hopefully that illustrates why I anticipated more of this paint would actually be removed with the masking tape. And why is that? There's a couple things at play here. For one, I used the Createx Illustration Opaque White intentionally. The reason behind that is the illustration line of colors actually takes a little bit longer to fully cure, and they were actually designed that way. That gives the artist a little bit more time to manipulate the paint if you're using either scratching or erasing techniques. So they do take a little bit longer to fully harden and cure compared to the Wicked or the Auto Airline. The other thing we have working against us here is you can probably tell from all the reflections that this panel has a clear coat over it. I didn't do anything to this panel other than clean it before I sprayed this white paint onto the panel. Paint does not like to stick to a very smooth, especially shiny finish. So I'm going to take some 4012 reducer, I'm going to clean this paint off, and then we'll continue. So let's talk about adhesion. When it comes to paint, you basically get adhesion through one of two ways. It's either mechanical adhesion or it's chemical adhesion. When it comes to chemical adhesion, there are two ways that you can get chemical adhesion. One is using an adhesion promoter to promote adhesion of the paint. The other is through the paint just bonding to itself chemically. Mechanical adhesion refers to actually etching or scratching a tooth into the surface. Again, paint does not like to stick to a smooth, especially glossy surface. I've got a new panel very similar to the one I had up here before, but this panel has never been painted previously. It's got a powder coat finish on it, which is not glossy, but it's extremely smooth. We could go through the same exercise that I just showed you guys on the previous panel on this panel, and we would get pretty much the same results because paint is not going to want to stick to this. It doesn't have a mechanical tooth. You can't use chemical adhesion to begin with. You have to have a good mechanical adhesion as your base layer. Now once you start putting paint onto the surface, after you have a good mechanical adhesion, then the chemical adhesion takes over. The paint actually bonds to itself. So how do we get good mechanical adhesion? We need to scratch, sand, whatever you want to call it, the surface. We're etching a tooth, something for the paint to dig down into and bite on. That's what causes mechanical adhesion, and that's why I don't have problems with tape or any other masking material lifting my paint for the most part. Every now and then I'll screw up, but for the most part I don't have to worry about those issues. So the first thing that we want to do when you're prepping your panel is to make sure it's clean. Paint does not like to stick to oils and other things that you can transfer onto the surface through your hands either. So the first thing I want to do is clean this panel. I'm going to use just 4012 reducer and a paper towel. The 4012 reducer can be used as a pre-cleaner if you wish to do so. I'm just going to wipe down this panel. And you don't want to let this just evaporate on the surface either. So once you've got it good and wet, wiped down, then you'll take a dry paper towel and remove the excess. So at this point we've got a good clean panel. It's free of any oils or other contaminants that were on the surface. In order to get that mechanical tooth, you can use a number of different methods. You can use sandpaper, you can use Scotch-Brite is what I usually prefer. This is just a red Scotch-Brite pad, and all I'm going to do is begin scuffing the surface. You don't have to press hard, let the pad do the work for you. But essentially what you're trying to do is remove anything, and again this panel didn't have a glossy finish on it, it was more of a satin finish. So I want to remove all of that satin finish. I want a dull surface to begin working on. And you want to make sure you cover all of the surface. The corners and the edges are a lot of times what people miss or don't get quite as well. And that should be good. Now we have a good mechanical tooth ready to accept any paint that we want to spray on this panel. Again, we want to keep it clean. I tend to use these Scotch-Brite pads over and over and over again. You can get a lot of use out of one of these pads, and I'll leave a link in the description below where you can get these. But because I use these over and over again, there's a chance that I probably introduced some contaminants onto the surface. So once again, I'll take my 4012 reducer and we'll clean off this panel. Same process, getting it wet. You can also see we're removing particles removed from the surface as far as the powder coat is concerned. Then we'll take a dry paper towel and wipe away any residual 4012 reducer left on the panel. And now we have a good solid mechanical base layer for our paint to bite into. A quick note on adhesion promoters, because some of you are probably wondering, well, could you not just spray an adhesion promoter on this panel before we actually scuffed it and get good adhesion that way? The answer is no. That's not the way adhesion promoters work. Adhesion promoters are designed for problem materials, meaning materials that paint is going to have a hard time adhering to even with a good mechanical tooth. You still need that mechanical foundation for proper adhesion. This is the key to good adhesion. The work you put in prior to ever putting any paint down is what makes or breaks a good paint job. That's the key, having a good mechanical foundation. After the mechanical foundation is taken care of, then chemical adhesion takes over. Chemical adhesion, again, is just the paint bonding to itself. We're very fortunate with the Createx line of paints in that you don't have any working windows to worry about. In the solvent-based paint systems, you have what's called working windows, and it varies depending on what brand of paint you're actually using, but it can be a time frame anywhere from 12 hours all the way up to about 72 hours, which is really kind of stretching the limits. If you exceed that time frame, you lose the chemical adhesion. Now there are ways to cheat that we're not going to get into in this video, but the pros as far as the Createx water-based paint system stands is there are no working windows. You can spray paint on this, set it down for a week, a month, come back to it, and you're still going to have the chemical adhesion in the paint without having to do anything else. So for example, if I wanted to start this panel with a white base instead of a black base, I could come in with a white Autoborn sealer, coat this white. I don't need to come in and scuff the surface after I spray the sealer. That's when chemical adhesion takes over. So I can spray the sealer, I can let it sit for a month, come back to it, still paint over it, and the paint is going to bond to itself. The mechanical adhesion, that base foundation, is the key to really good adhesion when it comes to your paint projects. If you're having problems with masking materials pulling up your paint, then take a hard look at what you're doing in the preparation stages, because that is very, very, very important when it comes to custom paint work. Next, we'll look at a couple other ways that you can pull paint up even with a good mechanical foundation using masking techniques. Another problem I commonly see that causes paint to be peeled up with masking techniques comes down to us as the artist and the tools we're using. Generally, it happens when we are using one of these. Whether you prefer a razor blade or an X-Acto knife, chances are, if you're using masking techniques, a lot of the time we're actually cutting portions of the mask out in order to paint them. Now, that's not in all cases. If you have a vinyl cutter, you can cut out computer cut vinyl masks, But a lot of times when we're using masking techniques, we actually cut out portions of the design in order to mask off areas and unmask other areas that we want to paint. If this is something you're not very good at, practice. Use brand new razor blades. It takes far less pressure with a brand new blade to cut through the masking material than it does with a dull blade. If you're using a dull blade, you have to use more pressure, and there's a better chance that you're going to go through the masking material and all the way into the substrate that you're actually painting. If you score the paint on your substrate and then you mask over it, or if you are already masked and then you score that substrate, when you peel that mask away, it's a pretty good chance you're going to cause a delamination, which means the mask will pull up paint where you've scored it. Get in the habit of using a new blade. Change it often. If you're not very good at cutting through just the masking material, you might try cutting the design out before you actually apply it to your artwork. Dry spray can also be a culprit when it comes to masking materials removing paint. What is dry spray? Dry spray essentially means that you're at sufficient distance when you're spraying from the actual surface that you're painting to allow the paint particles to actually dry before they make it to the surface. That can also happen when you're airbrushing very light layers of paint where you may be closer to the surface, but you're very, very lightly glazing an area of your artwork. Essentially, if the paint particles are dry when they actually make contact with your painting surface, then you've lost the chemical adhesion portion of the equation. They're just dry particles sitting on the surface. So if you were to mask over all that dry spray with any masking technique that you want to use, and then you later remove that mask, you're going to remove any dry spray on the surface. What's the workaround to that? It's an intercoat clear. An intercoat clear is basically just a colorless binder for all intents and purposes. That's what it was in the solvent-based paint system world. In the water-based Createx products line, you can use a number of products. You can use a transparent base coat, or you can use the 40-30, or you can use the UVLS clear. All of those will make a perfect intercoat clear, and all you're doing is applying 1 to 2 coats of just a clear, a base coat clear over your artwork. And that does a couple things. That locks any dry spray that might be on the surface down. It also protects your artwork, so if you make a mistake later, you can actually remove that either with sanding techniques or a little bit of a cleaning, like I did earlier on the clear coat panel. I just wiped all that paint right away. I'm not saying you can do that with a base coat clear coat as easily. You can, but you have to be very careful because you can reactivate the paint layers when you're working without the catalyzed automotive top coat clear. But you can lock all your artwork down, and that's another way that you can protect it. Final thoughts. Everything we've talked about in this video does not just apply to the custom automotive world. It's more important in that realm, but I use all of this information in everything I do, including fine art. For example, this is a pet portrait that I'm currently working on. This is going to be a Christmas present for my daughter. This is her late pet, and this is on canvas, and it started with a mechanical tooth. I covered the canvas with gesso, and then I sand it down to get a mechanical tooth to make sure that this is going to last a very, very long time. Hopefully it's finished before Christmas. It's getting difficult with COVID because she's been out of school, so she's been here a lot. But I apply all of this information to everything I do, not just custom automotive stuff. The other thing I wanted to point out is you have to make sure that your paint is dry before you begin any masking techniques. This is crucial. It's extremely important. With the Createx water-based line in my studio, which is a temperature controlled environment and I have good airflow, I wait a minimum of 1 hour before I apply any masking techniques to anything I'm working on. A minimum of 1 hour. Again, that will depend on your environmental conditions. The temperature, the humidity, airflow, all of that plays a role in how fast or how slowly your paint cures. Ideally, you can wait overnight. If you're not in a rush, it's better just to let it sit overnight before you apply any of your masking, because if you apply the masking materials onto the paint before it's actually cured, even with that good mechanical foundation tooth and all the chemical bonding you have after that, you can still remove paint if you mask too early. So allow your paint to cure fully, and you should have no problems if you follow all of the other advice that I've given you throughout this video. Again, I'll leave a link in the description below where you can get the red Scotch-Brite pads. That's my favorite way of prepping materials or surfaces before I begin painting. I hope you guys got something out of this. If you did, remember to like, subscribe, and share. I'm Trevor with Wicked Art Studio, and I will see you guys next time.